Longboard terminology, part 5. We're going to talk about styles and disciplines of skating and get into slides and the names for a bunch of different slides a bit. But yeah, these videos have been going through a lot of the terminology, the lingo, the slang, some of the technical like descriptions of different aspects of downhill skating. If you haven't seen any of the others, I've covered wheels, trucks, decks, and the last video was roads. Been kind of cool to just explain stuff. Some stuff might be basic, you might know it all if you've been skating for a while. If you're new, hopefully it's kind of helpful. Yeah, right, so let's start with the different disciplines of longboarding. Obviously the first one would be downhill and freeride. That's predominantly what I partake in, and that's obviously any form of skating where you're going down a hill, if that's sliding, if that's gripping, if that's just, you know, riding for fun. But downhill and freeride is, you know, you're wearing the helmet and the slide gloves, you're going down hills and you're doing slides. That's downhill freeride. Obviously next would be racing, so that's downhill skating, but you're competing, you're racing against other people, like you have a closed track, you're trying to see who can get down the fastest. Again, that's pretty basic, but that's it's sort of a different discipline of skating when you add that race element into it, the competitiveness. Next would be cruising. This is probably the most popular discipline of longboarding, if I had to guess. Most downhill skaters and even racers probably started off by cruising around, and that's just, you have a longboard and you ride it for fun, cruising. It's simple, but yeah, cruising. LDP stands for long distance pushing, so it's sort of like, it's like cruising, but if you took cruising seriously, so you're on the flat and you're pushing for a long distance, that's long distance pushing. These guys are pretty hardcore. Like, I know there's an event where they're in a stadium and they just go around the stadium all day and see who can get the most laps or the highest distance or whatever. You also have them like just doing races over a long distance. A good example might be like the Broadway Bomb. It's a little different because it's kind of downhill, but it's still pushing the whole time. So yeah, that's a cool, different aspect of skating. Freestyle, I don't really know how to explain it. It's kind of like street skating in a sense, because you're doing tricks and you're sometimes using the environment to do those tricks, but you're on a longer board. So it's a little bit different to a trick like a street board. It's not something I've done very much of at all, but there's quite a few like unique tricks to longboards, that things that you can't really do on a street deck or things that are done differently on a longboard. This would be like a freestyle setup on a longboard. Kind of similar to freestyle would be longboard dancing. It's kind of in the name, you're effectively dancing on a board. These are typically like quite big, long boards with really loose trucks, and the people are effectively like, yeah, they're dancing on the skateboard. It's pretty cool. Dancing and freestyle often kind of blend in some parts where the dance moves are almost like tricks and some of the freestyle tricks are almost like dancing. So they kind of like cross paths quite a bit. It's quite a unique style, but it's pretty cool. We got double kick or hard wheel. This almost is like as if you were just free riding on a street board, but it's a little bit different because it's kind of the mentality of a downhill skater riding hard wheels on a street board. So these are doing tricks while sliding down a hill, or like just, yeah, combining the free ride mentality with a street style board. It's pretty cool. This kind of board, like it doesn't look fully like a street board. A little bit wider, a little bit bigger wheels, a little bit bigger board, but you're doing like slides and stuff on that small board. The last discipline I'll mention is slalom, and slalom is like in skiing slalom, it's the same kind of logic where you're going around cones or going around, you know, any kind of thing, I guess, on a track. And it's normally who can get the fastest time. So some of them, they'll have like a little drop-in ramp and they'll have cones. I don't know a ton about it, but it looks pretty cool. These boards are often pretty small, kind of like a street board or a small board, but you actually have the split trucks similar to a downhill racing board. You have the slalom trucks, which are really narrow, and a high degree, very turny front truck, and a low degree, not so turny back truck. And they can kind of pump the board and accelerate without pushing, it's pretty cool. But yeah, that's slalom. So I kind of have like a few different words that I've heard around a lot and that I use to describe people's skate style, and I feel like they probably mostly apply to all different disciplines of longboarding. But I'm kind of like a scale in a couple of bonus ones. We'll start off with like one end of the scale is like loose. If someone's style is really loose, they sort of look like they're not really in control and they're sort of hanging on. When they go around a corner, they might be wobbling side to side, or when they do a slide, they might sort of throw it around and stuff. Like, they just look really loose and kind of scary to watch almost. The next stage up from loose would be almost getting into surfy. So they're quite, you know, almost like loose, kind of moving around quite a bit, but they don't look as out of control. They look a little bit more controlled, but they still like to carve around and move around a lot while they're doing what they're doing. Yeah. Surfy, it looks like they're riding a surfboard, you know, they're kind of going with the flow a little bit, which then leads us into flowy. So flowy would be similar to surfy, I guess, but maybe a little bit like more control again. Like if someone has good flow, they look really smooth in the way they do things, but they're still kind of moving around like this a little bit. I don't know, a lot of this is kind of just like random slang type words of describing it, but I feel like there's a bit of a scale here, and these are definitely words that people use to describe style. I said it while describing flowy, but smooth would be another like style, I guess. Does someone look like, again, hard to explain, but like, do they look smooth while they're skating? You know, when they transition from one trick to another, or when they, you know, move from one side to the other, or anything. Is it smooth or is it jerky? Like, how do they look? Like, very smooth style. Next one would be like controlled. If someone looks very controlled, it's like, again, any kind of trick or a slide or anything. Does it look like they're in control? Not just like they successfully do what they did. Does it look like they had good control over what they did? That would be a controlled kind of style. Getting up further from controlled, you get into things like snappy. The best description of this would be in slides. Like if someone does a snappy slide, it's very clear, like, distinction between them gripping, sliding, and gripping up again. Very snappy. That would be like a certain kind of style. Next up from snappy, which I guess would sort of be like almost the other end of the scale, would be dialed. Kind of like controlled and snappy. Dialed is just like you watch someone do something and they do it perfectly, like basically perfectly every time. Like there's no sort of wobbling or flinching or shuffling around. Like you can see what they did and they did it with no imperfections at all. This could apply to any style of skating, like a slide that they just completely make the corner perfectly. You couldn't do it any better. Like, I don't know, maybe they do a kickflip and it's just so smooth and perfect. They have their kickflip dialed. It's just, they've got it down, basically. That's what dialed means. I guess like the extreme version of this would be if someone looks robotic, which would be like they can do the same thing over and over again and it looks identical. Like they're no longer just a person skating. They're like, now they're a robot just doing the identical trick over and over again. I don't use that term too often because not a lot of people are robotic in their sense. But robotic could also mean like, maybe they look a little stiff when they're doing it. It's almost like not a person, like it seems impossible, like they're too good. Yeah, that's what I would use for robotic. I guess two other words to include would be like, if people look stiff, any of these kind of styles, if you're stiff, you're not really loose, you're stiff. When you move around, you don't look comfortable, you don't really go with the flow, you don't move with the trick or with whatever it is that you're doing. You stand quite stiffly or you're skating quite stiffly. That's probably more on the negative end. People can also have an aggressive style. Like, again, it's kind of tricky to explain, but it's in the name, like aggressive. Do you look like you're attacking that road? Are you attacking that slide? Do you push like a maniac? Like, that would be an aggressive style. Okay, let's talk about like slides. Obviously, the first basics is Heelside and Toeside. Heelside is if you imagine you're turning and you're pushing down on your heels. So if you're doing a slide, you would be facing down the road, you're leaning on your heels. Toeside is the opposite, you're leaning on your toes. So when you're doing the slide, you've got your back to the road because your toes are facing up the hill. Then we have stand up and hands down slides. Stand up slide is when you look like you're standing up and the board slides. And a hands down slide is when you put that glove on the road. Again, some of these are obvious, but I don't know, if you're new, you might not know. Stand up, hands down, heel, toe. Sort of in between stand up and hands down, we have squat slides, which is when you're doing a heel side and you sort of squat, but your hands don't touch the ground. We call these squatties. I know in the States, a lot of people call them squatters, squatter slides. And the opposite of this for your toe side would be, we call it a Roman candle. Or I guess there's squat toes if you don't grab at all, but if you grab the board, that would be a Roman candle. We're getting into the nitty gritty of it now, so there's a lot of different slang and names. But yeah, squat toes, really tricky. You don't see a lot of people doing them. That's when you're like squatting down, but you're doing a toe side slide. And then Roman candle is when you grab the rail of your board and do a toe side slide, but your hand isn't actually on the ground. A pendy is short for a pendulum slide. This is where you slide and the board, it doesn't just do a 180 and stop. You sort of go past that 90-degree point and swing back. And like a double pendy would be going back and forth. This is often like beginners end up doing that, and it's sort of something that kind of happens naturally while you're learning. It's quite effective as a shutdown slide because it kills your speed quickly. Pendies, I tend to avoid them because if you're on freeride wheels, you're more likely to flat spot your wheels. You also have a little less control because you end up swinging around the road, but that's a pendy. A grab rail slide, I already briefly mentioned it with the Roman candles, but grabbing rail just means while you're sliding, you grab the rail of your board. So like me personally, anytime I'm doing a glove down toe side, I grab rail. Some people don't. Some people grab rail when they do a hands down heel side. I don't. It's just like a preference thing, kind of like a style type thing, but we would call that grab rail because you're grabbing the rail. Yeah. A 180 is in the name, like if you slide 180 degrees, this is when you would go from the front of your board, you would do your slide, now it would be the back of your board, you've done a 180. Obviously then a 360 is when you spin all the way around. Pretty self-explanatory, but yeah, it's 180 and 360. A shutdown slide, I think I mentioned it when I was talking about pennies. A shutdown slide is just any kind of slide where you're coming to a stop. So it could be at any point, at the end of a run, maybe something happens in the middle of a run, anywhere. It's a slide where you bring yourself to a complete stop. We call that shutting down, like you're stopping skating. That's a shutdown slide. Going back to the angle of like 180 degrees or 360 degrees of the angle of your slide, a high angle slide is when you're getting close to 90 degrees. So that's getting close to like your feet. If you imagine whether it's toes from, you're doing a heel side, your toes are facing down the hill, or you're doing a toe side, your heels are facing down the hill. The closer you are to that is 90 degrees, that's a high angle. You don't really want to be too close to 90 degrees because that's where your wheels are rotating while you're rolling and when you're sliding, but when they get to 90 degrees, they're just going straight this way. They're not going to turn as much and you're more likely to flat spot them. So a high angle is getting close to that 90 degree. Your board is quite sideways while you're sliding, and a low angle is like your board's sort of only angled out a little bit. It's a low angle drift, and that's a better form for like a race line or going through a corner, just sort of on a low angle drift. A little tricky to explain, but if you've tried slides before, you can kind of imagine what I'm talking about. There's all sorts of crazy slides when you get into it. So like blunt slides is when you stand on the kick of your board and you slide with the kick or the tail on the road. So your front wheels are up in the air, that would be a blunt slide. Stalefish is like when you're doing a squatter slide and you grab your rail of your board like between your legs or whatever. The list goes on and on and on. There's so many different tricks. I'm not going to try and list them all, but I've gone through those basics, and basically any kind of combination of the other ones or doing anything sort of spicy on top of that probably has a name for it. If it doesn't, I guess you get to name the trick yourself, but there's a whole lot of different slides out there that you can learn. And then, yeah, the one thing I haven't mentioned is switch. Switch would mean riding your board backwards, and you put switch and then in front of any of the slides I've mentioned, you've done the thing backwards. So, which is pretty impressive. Not many people ride switch, especially at the moment. It's not super popular, but yeah, just if you can ride your board backwards and do a heel side, that would be a switch heel side. So like the only switch slides I can really do is I can do a switch stand-up slide 180, and that's just because I learned to like 180 and then I had to figure out how to get back. So I learned how to switch 180, but I'm not really a switch skater. But yeah, switch, going backwards. Some sort of more general terminology in regards to sliding. We talk about the release. So this is the point where the wheels switch from being gripping and rolling to sliding. It's how they release into their slide. You could talk about like, does a wheel release smoothly, or does it have like a really difficult release? Like how easy does it slide out? That would be the release of the wheel. Opposite end of that would be the hookup. So at the end of your slide, when you grip up again, what is the hookup like? A square lip wheel, like a race wheel, is going to have a very defined hookup, quite a strong hookup, whereas a freeride wheel might be a little harder to hook up. It's hook up and release. Scrubbing is sort of in the gray area of releasing. It's like it's the wheel trying to slide, but it's not quite there yet. It's not got full traction, but it's not fully sliding yet. You'll often find this if you try and grip through a really tight corner, especially on slidey wheels. You can feel them sort of almost sliding a little bit, and that's called scrubbing. Two of the sort of ways of crashing to do with sliding are predominantly going to be gripping up, which is, we call that high siding. That often means, because if you can imagine your board is sideways, your wheels are sliding, and they stop and they hook up early, you've caught grip, you've gripped up, and we call that high siding because it often ejects you from the board. So you go up over the board, you high side. Heel side, it's not too bad, you can kind of jump up and run it out. But if you high side on the toe side, it can be pretty scary because you're going backwards and you've been thrown backwards like this. So yeah, but that's high siding. And then the opposite of this would be if you slide way more than you expect. We call this washing out. Some people would refer it to as low siding. People tend to not really call it that. We just call it washing out. But this is basically can be heel or toe side, any kind of slide. Like, you just slide way more than you expect. Washing out normally means you go right off the road. You could have a washy slide where you can slide way further than you expect. You basically lose control, but maybe you manage to get control again and roll away from it. You probably didn't wash out. You'd say, oh, I nearly washed out, or I had a really washy slide. But if you didn't go off the road, you didn't technically wash out. But yeah, so low siding, technical term, washed out, like the term we would actually use. People also call it icing out, like washing out and icing out, because it's like, imagine if the road or your wheels was ice and you just kind of fly off the road. The last slide I will mention is, I also mentioned it in roads because the term is sort of for both, but a combo breaker. And that's when you come into a corner and you drift the wrong way to the corner before drifting the correct way. So if you're heading into a right-hand corner, maybe it's got a bit of a left-hand kink before it, or maybe it's just really fast and too fast to just do one drift into the right hand. You would do a left-hand drift and then the right-hand drift, and that would be a combo breaker slide. So you're drifting one way and then the other, and so you switch in the middle. And this is used a lot in racing on like technical courses. It's also something that's just kind of fun to do. Combo breaker is just fun practice, switching from your heel to toe or toe to heel quickly. It's quite a cool, fun skill to have. But yeah, that's combo breakers. But yeah, that's sort of some terminology in regards to the styles and disciplines of skating, as well as a touch on some of the slides and terminology around sliding with like downhill and freeride. I'm sure I missed a ton of stuff. Let me know if I said any words and you have different ways of describing them or different words for it. Obviously, as far as like slides go or tricks, like I only sort of briefly touched on that. There's a lot more to that. But yeah, this has been fun to make these videos, and I think I'll probably do another video of more general terms down the line a bit. I've been reading all the comments and been like pretty stoked on how many people have like corrected me or added more. And so I'll probably do a video, you know, 2, 3, 4 weeks from now, and I'll include everything that people have said in the comments of these videos, as well as like I've got a general list of other things that didn't really fit into a category. But yeah, shout out again to Emily, whose idea it was for these videos, and yeah, thanks for watching.